where we are. How is everybody this morning? Wet. Well, you know. Yeah, I started to say, it's not slick wet, is it? So there's something to be said for that. You realize we experienced all 4 seasons this week. Welcome to Tennessee. Welcome to Tennessee. Are there any announcements we need to make? I don't know of any. Remember those that will be announced that are on the announcement sheet. Remember, George, talked to him Friday. I haven't talked to him since Friday. And others. Let's see. Miss Penny and Miss Renelda and others. Remember them. Anything else we need to announce? After class, in between class and worship, I'm going to give you a card. And I'll just tell you now, you'll be prepared for it. Just take your card, just set it off to the side. At the end of the sermon this morning, it will come into play. So when I hand you that, don't say, what is this? Just take it and say, no, preacher, you know. So that's the way it is. Anyway, all right. We're ready to talk about Isaac and Abimelech. And we got into that a little last week, and we talked about how that Abimelech was lied to again by Isaac, and he did just like what his father did. Kind of the outcome's a little bit different, if you will. Abimelech sent Abraham away and gave him a lot of stuff, but let's see what happens to Isaac. Genesis chapter 26, verse 10. And Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might soon have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt on us." So Abimelech charged all of his people, saying, "He who touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." So Isaac, Becca, were protected, guaranteed protection from the throne. And Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him. There's a bountiful harvest. When you reap 100-fold, that's a tremendous yield. And so he had a tremendous yield, if you will, a great bounty that's come about. And it says the man began to prosper and continued prospering until he became very prosperous, for he had possessions of flocks and possessions of herds and a great number of servants. So the Philistines envied him. Now, here's the difference. Abraham pretty much, Abimelech was, get out of here. He gave him stuff to get out. Isaac, though, has seemingly to work. He works the land. He works hard. And so he begins to build and produce, if you will, for lack of a better term in our terminology, a farm. And he begins to grow. And notice that it says in the last part of verse 14 that the Philistines envied him. It's what happens a lot of times is man gets, accumulates a certain amount of goods and possessions and things due to hard work or whatever, and there are those that begin to envy him, envy the position that he's in, envy what he has. And this is going to cause trouble for Isaac. And yet it seems, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like in verse 12, that Isaac had, as the old saying goes, put his hand to the plow. He'd started working for it. It's not something that was just handed, or had he taken it by crook, as we might say. But nevertheless, the folks envied him. Now the Philistines had stopped up all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham, his father, and they filled them with earth. And Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you're much mightier than we." So they kick him out. Moses, by inspiration writing this, said that there were those of the Philistines that had come about, and they had filled in the wells. Now, a well, as we think of it, a long time, we think of really, in this day and age, really a narrow passageway. You put a small pipe in. But you got to remember that a well was dug, and it was dug by hand. And so it was not just this perfect little cylinder that we think of with regards to wells. It would take a tremendous amount of work to dig it, but it would also take a certain amount of work to fill it in. Everywhere seemingly Abraham went and stayed for a little while, what did his servants do? They dug a well. Why? Had crops, had sheep, had goats, had cattle, if you will. They had things that needed to be fed, let alone themselves needed to be watered. And so Abraham, every time he stopped, if you will, and was going to stay here for a little while, if there wasn't a well, there was a well that was dug. Philistines came in and closed them all up. Why? Keep people out. Keep people away. Drive the people to where they wanted to drive them. And so Abimelech says, get out of here. You're mightier than us. We just want you to leave. And so Isaac departed from there and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar and dwelt there. And Isaac dug again the wells of waters which they dug in the days of Abraham his father. For the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. He called them by names which his father had called them. Water was a tremendous resource. Water was important. And so Isaac, where he went, he just went back, he redug the wells. Gave them the same name. Respect for the place, respect for his father. He gave the same names, called them by the same things that his father had called them. And Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of running water there. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen, saying, the water's ours. So he called the name of the well Esek. The word Esek means strife or quarrel, because they quarreled with him. Then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one also. So he called its name Sitnah. And the Sitnah simply means hostility. And so he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it. So he called its name Rehoboth, which literally means spacious or broad place. He'd finally come to a place where they weren't going to run him out anymore. They'd taken the wells. He'd go to a place, he'd dig a well. And like I say, they didn't just dig a well in a day. And it just wasn't just one person digging a well. This was an arduous process. And he'd get a well dug, and we're going to take your well. And they'd take his well. But notice, one of the things to notice, and I want to make a practical application when we get to the end of this chapter. But notice the fact, at least from the way the story is told, he doesn't say anything. He doesn't kick up a fuss. He doesn't fight. He just simply says, okay, you want it. We'll go on. We'll move on. Till he finally gets to this place that evidently they didn't want it anymore. Maybe they were tired of chasing him. Maybe they were tired of following him, and maybe they were tired of and thought he would not come back. They had driven him far enough out that he would not come back. Scriptures don't tell us. And from a historical standpoint, I don't know that there's any indication anywhere of what the reason was. But nevertheless, he goes out and he finds finally enough place, for there's enough room there for Isaac and for his people and his herds, and they leave him alone. Then he went up from there to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for my servant Abraham's sake. This is a great promise. It's in many ways, not completely, of course, but in many ways it sounds like the same promise that his father was given. A little different. It wasn't talked about with regards to, all the multitude of blessings. But this is a blessing. This is an assurance of God. And it's an assurance of God's covenant with him, of his faithfulness. God's going to be faithful. God's going to be faithful to Isaac. And what a great thought that is. Now, we have that assurance in the text, in the Bible. We have that assurance. But think about what Isaac had. All he had was the understanding of what his father had told him that he had received from God. We live in a day and age in which our faith is based upon the Bible. Now, it's based upon what we see as well. Don't mistake that. But because Paul said in 2 Corinthians 5, verse 7, we walk by what? Faith and not by sight. Our faith is based upon looking at the Bible and being able, because maybe we don't do it every day or as often as maybe even we should, but we have sat down and we have looked at the Bible and we have studied the Bible and we have studied individuals that have studied the Bible, and we've come to the conclusion in our own thinking, each individually, that this Bible is from God, and that consequently, being from God, it can be trusted and it can be relied upon. We have come to that understanding. We have come to that point in our thinking and in our belief. And so when the Bible tells us to do something, we have faith to do it. When the Bible assures us of something, then we have faith that that assurance is true and right and good. And so our faith is a little bit different than Isaac's faith. You see, Isaac is going off of nothing written. His is a life of faith. Yes, Abraham's was definitely a life of faith. Well-founded faith, well-grounded faith. But it was a faith that they could hang their hat upon. It was a faith that they could move by, and it was a faith that they were assured of by God. And so when Isaac gets this reassurance from God, you can imagine how that all of a sudden, he is given more confidence, more reassurance. I'm ready to go. And so, verse 25 says, so he built an altar there. He called on the name of the Lord, and he pitched his tent there. And there Isaac's servant dug a well. So they began to dig another well. But they worshiped God. They built an altar there, and they began to worship. This is the place. We're going to honor this place, and we're going to honor our God for what he's done. So Abimelech came to him from Gerar with Ahuzeth, one of his friends, and Pichol, the commander of his army. And Isaac said to him, why have you come to me, since you hate me, and have sent me away from you? But they said, we've certainly seen that the Lord's with you. So we said, let there be an oath between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you. Now, we've talked about a covenant. Covenant's an agreement, a treaty, if you will. It's kind of interesting because they said they've come to a conclusion. And this conclusion is, we know God's with you. We know the Lord's with you. We know that he is helping you, that he is carrying you through. And so they said, we need to make a covenant with you. And that is, verse 29, that you will do us no harm, since we have not touched you, and since we have done nothing to you but good, and have sent you away in peace. You are now the blessed of the Father. Didn't exactly tell the truth, did they? You might say they were horse trading a little bit. Oh, we really like you. Sort of like you go buy a car and the car salesman says, I really like you. And in reality, he doesn't care about you. He's just trying to sell you a car. And so, that's what they're saying. We really like you. But we want to make sure that nothing, and therein lies the truth of the matter. We don't want any harm to come to us. And so, it says, verse 30, he made them a feast, they ate, and they drank. Now, that was kind of the common fare of the day. If you were going to make a treaty, if you were going to go into an agreement, you sat and you had a feast. You sat and you ate and you drank and you kind of hashed all the details out. Then they arose early in the morning and swore an oath with one another, and Isaac sent them away, and they departed from him in peace. And it came to pass the same day that Isaac's servants came and told him about the well which they had dug, and said to him, "We found water." So he called it Sheba. The word Sheba, it literally means seven, but it can also have the idea of an oath. So therefore the name of the city is Beersheba. Ber meaning city of oath, or city of seven. When Esau was 40 years old, he took as wives Judith, the daughter of Beri, the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite. And they were grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. There was sort of a constant, bitter, if you will, source as these women, you think about these women that they've married, were Canaanite women. God wanted his line to be unadulterated, to be pure, if you will. In the respects with regards to especially the Old Testament, you had that line of Abraham, and then you had everybody else. These Canaanite women would have been women that would have been idolatrous. They wouldn't have served God. They wouldn't have definitely served the God. They would have served a god, or in true Canaanite fashion, many gods, and so thus been polytheistic. And these women almost always served, or seemingly were a constant reminder of grief, because our folks, our line hasn't done what it should. Seemingly, there was not a care for the promise made to Abraham. And there was not a care for what God had set forth for them. We're going to do our own thing. Now, we see that many times, not just here in Genesis 26, but we see it many times played out through Scripture. We're going to do our own thing. We're going to do it our way. We're going to do how we want to when we want to. You get to, say, the book of Judges, and it talks about how that every man did that which was right in his own eyes. In many ways, it still plays out today. But the mention, I think, of these, and so many times we wonder, especially as we go through the Old Testament, we say, why is this lineage here, and why are these folks mentioned? Well, it's just simply to show us that there was, even amongst the family, if you will, there was a lack of spiritual values. Now, we can't always lay that at the parents' feet. When Solomon said in the book of Proverbs, train a child in the way he should go, when he's old, he should not depart from it. That can't be an absolute statement. It's a good statement. And it's a statement that parents should all aspire to train their children in the way that they should go. That doesn't mean they're going to stick with it. If we say that that's an absolute statement, that denies then the possibility of apostasy. But the Bible teaches that. So we can train our children. We can bring them to church. We can pray over them, and we can pray with them, and we can pray for them, and we can teach them the Bible at home, and we can teach them morality. It doesn't mean that it's going to take. Now, our responsibility as parents is to teach and to train. Our responsibility as parents is to show them the way, to show them that it is a good way. But we also have to remember that our children are influenced by a great many other things as well. Now, that's why when they're in our home, we try to make sure the influence is good and pure and wholesome and right. But it doesn't mean that they will follow the straight and narrow. I was thinking of a case last night of a man and a woman that were both seemingly diligent servants in the Lord's kingdom. She had a son without the benefit of marriage when she was young, and then they had a daughter. And so while the stepfather raised the boy like his own, he was not biologically his. The children grew up. The girl now is living with someone and is to be married, I think, this coming summer. Boy he is in his third marriage, if I'm not mistaken, and he has left his first two wives for his next wife. In other words, he left his first wife for his second wife, and he left his second wife for his third wife. In other words, there's fornication involved. And yet, when these children were being raised, like I say, their mother and father, they were active in the church, very active, served as Bible school teachers and many, many things. Now, I will say this, that the reports that I have gotten, because the family has moved off, is that mom and dad are following the example of the children instead of the children following the good example of the mother and father, and that's sad too. But it reminds us of several things. It reminds us as parents to train. It reminds us as grandparents to train. It reminds us, though, that we all need to be careful in what we do and what we say. And we need to train our children as best we possibly can. If they fall away, it may or may not necessarily be our fault. I know you can say, well, what about Ezekiel that said, the father shall bear the iniquity of the children, basically the children shall bear the iniquity of their parents. Yeah. But at the same time, too, we have to allow our children freedom of thought. Now, we may not like it. We may not appreciate it. But we have to allow them that. Because as servants of God, we have to serve God willingly and not out of compulsion. The only compulsion we have in our service to God, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 5, is the love of Christ. Remember where Paul says the love of Christ constrains us? The word constrains literally means to push in. Every time I think of that verse or read that verse, I think of a trash compactor. You don't see, too many people have them anymore, but you think of a trash compactor and how you would put your trash in this little machine, you'd turn it on and it'd push in from both sides. It's sort of like going out to the salvage yard and seeing those cars, how they used to mash them into small cubes. And so Paul says the love of Christ constrains us, because we thus judge that if one died for all, and that we therefore should be servants of God. Now, I've preached for a little while. Is there something somebody likes to say? I want to make a different application to all of these verses here in just a second, but is there something somebody likes to say or ask? Well, let me kind of run just a little weird for just a minute on this. And in verse 17 especially beginning, I see an interesting thought. This interesting thought, at least to me, maybe not to you, but to me, is how do you get along with people? How do you get along with people that they're just hard to get along with? You've had them maybe. You've had neighbors that were hard to get along with. I haven't had neighbors. I've had neighbors live farther away. Had a lady once that called me, and Suzanne and I had been married but about a year or so, and my dogs had gotten over there, and there was a duck that she said they were chasing. And I said, were they on your property? She called me up and read me the riot act. And I said, were the dogs on your property? No. Is the duck your duck? No. But they were chasing that duck. I understand that. Where were they? In the middle of the road. I was young. I was stupid. Shouldn't have said it. But I said, well, the way I see it, they had about as much right to the road as the duck had. And so she slammed the phone on me. I wouldn't do that again. I wouldn't say that again like that. But yes. 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 But I was deemed by her and not by anybody else in the neighborhood, and lived in a subdivision, as being a complicated, very hard to live with person. To which my wife said, amen. But never have had any problems with neighbors. I always have gotten along well with my neighbors. But there are some people that really are hard to get along with. And how do you get along with people? Well, I think in many ways, beginning in verse 17, there's at least some thoughts that we might ponder on. Let me give you 3 or 4, if you don't mind. First of all, don't strike blow for blow. Don't strike blow for blow. Think about what Isaac did. The Philistines filled up, the wells, and so when they got to a well that was full, and they wanted to dig it out, and they dug it out, and then here would come Abimelech's men, and they, this is ours. This is ours. Well, it would have been easy, to a degree, to have stood there and said, no, this is ours. We just dug it. We're claiming all of this. And thus create a fight, a disturbance. I will go this far. It's all right if sometimes folks think they have the upper hand over you, whether they do or don't. It's all right. Now, you might say, well, preacher, we got to be very careful there, because in this day and age, we have land and we have finances, and we have to take care of those things, and if we just let people come in and take over, then we give it all up and we have nothing, and they've virtually taken everything that was ours. I got you. I understand. Yeah, you got to stand up for what's yours. Not saying that. But sometimes we're so ready to go to court, or we're ready to start a fight, that when really the best thing to do is just simply, so to speak, not literally, but proverbially, pack up the bag and move on to the next place. Pick your battles and pick them cautiously. And I think there's a great lesson here, is just don't strike blow for blow. Recompense to no man evil, we're reminded. But secondly, like the first one, move on in difficult times, in times of indifference, in times when it really doesn't matter. Just move on. Just be willing to pack the bag and move on, so to speak. We preachers have to learn this from time to time, the idea of packing up and moving on, and that's not always fun. But it's true of all of us. At times in life, we have to just simply move on. Thirdly, don't call names. And don't call them names. Well, that dumb idiot so-and-so, what did that accomplish? It made me feel better. Yeah, but for how long? And yes, that's what we all say. But yeah, for how long? And what did it accomplish? Because here's an interesting thought. Is it really about us feeling better? Sin. Let's define sin. Sin can be defined in many ways. You can say, well, sin is from a clinical standpoint. The Greek word sin means to miss the mark. But there are also other words, such as iniquity and transgressions, that are used in the Bible to talk about sin. And we can say, well, sin is twisting what is right, or sin is changing what is right. That's a sort of a oversimplified definition of iniquity and transgressions. Sin is going beyond transgressions, the idea of going beyond or even falling short of what you're supposed to do. But I really think, while those are clinical definitions for sin, I think probably the best definition that I've ever heard for sin is that sin is what violates sonship with God and brotherhood with mankind. In other words, as preachers talk about it and as theologians talk about it, there is a horizontal and a vertical relationship that we are to have. The vertical relationship is a relationship with God. Horizontal relationship is a relationship with man. And we're supposed to have both of those to be acceptable in God's sight. That's right. So we have to be very careful in our relationship with folks, because while we view the relationship with God as utmost importance, we should. God also says that relationship with man is of utmost importance. And so we have to be very careful. Be willing to let go of things. And interestingly enough, I think maybe the last point is be willing to go the second mile. Whoever compels you to go with him a mile, go with him too. It's not easy, is it? Never let it be said that it was easy. But it's the idea of getting along with people. Now, hopefully I've stirred up the pot enough that somebody has something they want to say. Yeah. Good point. Anything else? Yeah. Right. 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 That's right. Yeah. 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 And the first little point that you made is that there's only so much we can do. We cannot change the attitude and mindset of people. They have to do it themselves. Now, what we hope is by our kindness. If you go back, and that's Romans 12:17. If you go back to Romans 12, and he talks about there, as much as lies in you, live peaceably with all men. He says, if your enemy hungers, feed him. If he thirsts, give him water to drink. For in so doing, you shall heap coals of fire upon his head. So in other words, Paul says what? Try to out-nice him, right? But some folks, you just can't out-nice, right? Because they're not going to take it. But it's up to us to do what we can. And like Jim said, folks tend to wear out eventually. Jim Dillingham said, we want people on the phone here. Just not Jim Orman. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Well, 491st time, 70 times 7. Yeah, but that is and that's to me that's the $64,000 question. When do we stop and say I've had enough? And I've been loving and kind and forgiving, compassionate, and nothing else has worked. And let me try the other.
just about as easy to be nice as it is to be ugly.
Yeah.
When Jim says that, you're a stupid idiot. When you say that, it helps you.
Right.
You might as well be nice, because then you can't undo it.
Yeah.
If you ever go down the other road, it's hard to come back.
Yeah.
I think about it a lot in my brother, and I don't, so far I have not gone down the ugly road with my brother. You know, he goes down it with me about every third time I ever talk to him in a year. But I'm pretty sure if I ever go down it, there's no coming back. So I thought a lot about that, what you're talking about. I don't, you know, I mean, you're going to protect yourself. You're not going to let them take advantage or hurt you physically or financially or whatever, but you're not going to go
right
down the ugly road, the nasty mouth road. It's not, I just don't think you ever go down.
Yeah. No.
I think it hurts you more than anybody else. I mean, because if you give in to that part of yourself, like you said, it's a nasty little road to go down, and I'm not sure. It's not one easy to make you turn on.
That's right.
I had a lady that worked for me once who showed me a letter she was about to mail to her sister-in-law. She told me a story about why she was mad at her. She let her read that letter, and this is probably 25 years ago, I've never forgotten it. And I said, you can't mail this. She said, I'm mailing it. I said, well, if you mail this, you just dropped a nuclear bomb right in the middle of your family. I don't care. And I asked her later. She said, yeah, I mailed it. I'm not listening to her mouth. And, you know, so they never, you know, that was 25 years ago when I asked her about her brother's family. You know, it's nothing. So I just don't think you can protect yourself, but you can't ever, I don't think you ever go down that. And so much of it, for me, is not, and this is probably a bad thing to say, but it's not so much that it's a sin to, it's just the Bible teaches us a lot of things that are just better off for us, like an just
Yeah.
So you just turn to other because when you start that one-upmanship and escalate, you know, sometimes that ends in murder because you didn't just walk away. And which one of us has ever walked away from a situation and thought about it later and said, you know, I should have given them a piece of, I should have took it up a notch. When you can't walk away, you're always better off like Vanessa said, pretty quick. So much of what we talk about in here, you have to wonder that it's not so much a command from God and we're supposed to obey it, but it's not us, you know, God telling us this because it'll be better for us. So let something go.
Yeah.
Let it go.
Yeah.
Every time you see somebody not let it go, what? It doesn't seem like it ever happens.
Yeah.
I've always said if I was my true self at work, I'd never keep a job. You can't do certain things. You can't necessarily tell people what you think. You've got to learn to keep things in check.
And when you do see somebody do it, they're never better off. So it could be, I'm sure it's a sin, but also it could be God's giving us some practical advice about how to just live a little easier life. Get through this life so we'll get to the next one a little easier.
Well, I think it's all summed up in that last point I just made. Go the second mile. Go the second mile. That's what it's all about. And it is so hard to stand up for yourself and sometimes see yourself, at least in your eyes, feel abused.
Sure, I feel abused.
But
I don't, like you said, if I ever say the things that he says to me, then that's probably what I want to.
Yeah. Here's something I've been thinking about in that regards. And let me just use myself. I'm not going to get into specifics. I'm going to get into vague generalities. But I'm going to use myself so that you understand what I'm trying to say, and I'll be glad to talk with you, but I'm not going to tell you facts. I'm 59 years old. I'll be 60 in May. And I look back at some events in my life that have similarities. And I've learned from the mistakes that I made in some of those things. And as I've gotten older, I've looked back and I've said, when I was learning, I didn't like what I did. But after I learned the lesson, when something similar came up to it that was much like it, and I handled it differently, I sure do like the way I handled it differently. I like it the second way. We're not going to be perfect in our reactions to folks. We learn from those things and we think, okay, the next time something like this happens, have I learned from it? And what did I learn? And am I better off? And did I do better? And I like the fact that as I've gotten older and dealt with some of those things, and I'm not talking out of an abundance of things that I screwed up when I was young, just one or two things, but I sure do like the way I handled it, having learned the lesson. And so those lessons, though, are hard to take. They're hard to receive, and they're not, when you go through them, they're not you don't think they're a blessing, but as time passes, you think, that's a blessing. And it gets back to this point. How do you see it? What's your, you've heard me talk about your worldview. Your worldview is how you view everything. Now, hopefully your worldview is shaped by your faith. Your faith shapes your view, and thus your attitude and your actions are shaped by your faith. But your worldview also is influenced by things that have happened to you through the years, whether you're 10 years old or you're 110. And so consequently, your worldview doesn't change drastically, but constantly is being changed, but just a little bit. You ever look through, it's a kaleidoscope, isn't it? Carl, where you look through and it has a little prism in it, and you look through, and I had one of those cardboard ones when I was a kid. My mother and father gave me one. And most fascinating, it had little rocks and little things. We even made some that we could put in the end, and you could turn it just slightly, and one of those things tip over a little bit, and all of a sudden the whole, if you will, picture changed. Well, that's sort of what happens to our worldview. It changes from time to time. Now, it's basically set by our faith, and thus that's shaped our attitude. But we have to be careful that we don't let life so change us so much that we become so hard and we become like it. We are to stand out from the world and not be like the world. Anything else? All good. Excuse me. Yeah.
It's very difficult for me to let those things slip.
Yeah.
There have been times when I wish that I had.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that I'm surrounded by people who have a love of God as I want to have.
Yeah.
That can help me on those things.
Yeah.
And I'm very blessed in that respect. That several people taught me off the ledge when I was going to do some, pardon the expression, stupid, idiotic things. And that was a big benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. But and I so appreciate your statement, because one of the things that it ran through my head as you were talking is, to me, that's the beauty of the church. Is, okay, I've got this flaw and you don't, and you can help me with mine, and whatever is yours, maybe I can help you with yours, or I can tell you somebody that can. So
Since Pat's not here, I'll say.
she's not listening, is she? Pat, listen to this. she can't really hear what, yeah. I know.
She's not here, I'll tell you, I don't have
I'll tell a story on Jim and Pat. You all know when I first got here, the pandemic set in and quarantine set in. I mean, first Sunday I was preaching on the telephone. And in the process of all this, our beloved Elder Jay said, it's time for our pictorial directory. And so, in the midst of all that, then he started taking pictures. And I was down here. Friday is my day off. I'm here half of the day on Friday at least. And you can call me anytime. Friday, Saturday, it doesn't matter. But anyway, I was down here. And I heard this couple come in. I knew that they was getting a picture made. And I mean, he was ragging her just awful. And I thought, well, there's going to be some counseling that have to be done here. And there's going to have to be, we're going to have to do something. And so I was in my office. So I went down the hall to see who this was. And I saw who it was, and I thought, well, okay. So I thought, I'm going to wait till they get their picture made. Jay's a pretty good, fast photographer. And I'm going to come out, and I'm going to see, if there's any damage needs to be done to repair the damage. And so came out, and as they started coming out, this woman started giving this man just right back, just it's Jim and Pat. And I found out that those two, so love each other and have such a wonderful relationship that they can rag each other. And not everybody's relationship's like that. There are some very serious couples, and there's some. Ken and I every once in a while we talk about Andy Griffith, and if you remember, there's an episode there where there's a couple that just argue all the time, and so Andy gets the man to say good morning, dear, and then the wife said good morning, dear, and they're miserable because that's not the way their relationship worked. They loved each other desperately, but they fussed and fought. Now, I'm not saying fuss and fight's a good idea, but at the same time, too, just remember, Jim really does love Pat, and Pat tolerates it. No, she loves Jim. I just had to say it. But when that story, it really did. They came in and he was giving, and I thought, oh man. And then when they walked out, and when they got out of the building, I looked at I don't know. I think George was even here, and I said, well, I found out one thing: she can give as good as she can get. So we love her too. We love her. We love her. She's a darling. Jim, we love Jim too. He's a great man. We appreciate it. Well, we love them, and we're glad that they're here with us and appreciate them. That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, my wife keeps reminding me of that. Something happened yesterday at our household, and I won't tell you what. And I told her, I said, next week, which is not today, but next Sunday, I'm preaching on. And I said, and I'm going to have to bite my tongue not to use this as an illustration for that sermon. And here's what she said: you better not. So if I use it next Sunday and come to your door and say, I need a place to sleep, you'll know. Anything else? Well, let's bow for a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day and for the blessing of it. Thankful for the opportunity that is ours to study your word and to learn from it. Thankful for the group that spoke this morning with us and shared, and we were able to laugh and to learn, to listen, and to lean upon each other. And we're thankful that we have that group. We're thankful for all that you've given to us and the fact that you love us and watch over us. And we ask that you be with those that are sick, those that have just gone through surgery, and those that are facing surgery, that you'll bless them and keep them. Be with us all and bless us and watch over us. For this our prayer in Christ's name, amen. Y'all are a great group, and I hope you know that. Martin, who's been coming with us lately, he told me Wednesday night, he said, I didn't know anybody the first time I came, but he said, I really like this little group. And so that's a great thing for us to have. Feather in our cap.